Okay, I got a lot of comments on my last video calling it unfair, and to be honest, I was convinced until I ran these tests. Now, I have no idea who to believe. Today, I'm going to be doing a MIDI jitter shootout between the MRCC and the ERM Multiclock. The Multiclock is an audio accurate MIDI clock generator, and the MRCC doesn't generate clock, but it takes MIDI signals and routes them around however you want. So what I wanted to figure out today was, one, how much more accurate the Multiclock would be against the MRCC when sequencing hardware from a DAW and then recording that same hardware back into the DAW, because that's kind of the big selling point of the Multiclock, right? It's using audio to sync MIDI devices, which is way more accurate than just a simple USB 2.0. And two, I wanted to figure out how much jitter, aka slop in the MIDI clock, is present in the recordings of my hardware into the DAW. The tests were extremely simple, but extensive, and I spent a ton of time being as thorough as I could, doing multiple recordings, checking latency settings, monitoring modes, and all the other weird settings you get in a DAW. I ran two main tests with like a couple sub-tests. Basically, test one was a kick for 10 minutes being clocked by the MRCC, then again by the Multiclock. Test three was a kick for 5 minutes, but with heavy plugins loaded and browsing presets while being clocked by the MRCC, then again by the Multiclock, and that's where things started to really fall apart. And because I just had to figure out what the hell was going on, I ran another bonus test at the end. And yeah, it's weird. All right, let's get deep. In test one, the MRCC ran for 10 minutes. I immediately noticed some jitter. You can see the kick waveform is slightly earlier in different areas across the recording. What you want is the waveform to start exactly the same distance away from your beat markers, but within 20 to 30 seconds, I saw it jumping around. But just to be thorough, I let the test run for a full 10 minutes. Now I did this with the Multiclock, but I noticed something interesting. While getting the latency dialed in, the Multiclock kept jumping around. No matter what I would do, it would jump early or late, even when no settings were changed. All in all, it's still less than 1 millisecond, right? But it's interesting that this keeps changing, look. So that's a little less now here. And if we can remember that size, which we won't, but now look at that. That's definitely way bigger than where it just was. Not even 1 millisecond. Let's see when 1 millisecond pops up. Okay, 1 millisecond's about right here. That's a millisecond. So this is under a millisecond. Do we have any reason to complain about this? Probably not, right? I think that this is well beyond the realms of being usable. Now, I'm not going to dock any points on it though, because I went back and tested the MRCC and it was basically doing the same thing. And I'm not really sure what to attribute this to, but if I had to guess, it might have something to do with sample rates or word clock and their sync being slightly off with like the audio interface. I don't really know. All right, it's almost half a millisecond off. I can change it on the ERM. I went from 71.18 to 71.24. It's gonna jump a lot. Okay, it jumped backwards in time, which is not at all what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to jump this way. I was adding latency. I was pushing it later into the sequence, but again, that's not what it was supposed to do. Let's try that one more time. There we go. Now it actually jumped further back, but again, we're still well within half of a millisecond. Does anybody care about half of a millisecond? I'm not sure. With the clock being different between recordings, does it stay consistently off for the entire single recording take? And after looking at the 10-minute recording, the answer was a clear no. It's always jumping around, aka jitter. So for test one, it was basically a tie. Now, test two with the MRCC and the heavy loaded plugins was very interesting to say the least. All right, let's plug this back in. It should be pretty much in line with where I had it earlier, right? So let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at that. Wow. So if we look at our original MRCC recording, it was here. Now, the same port, everything, same settings, it's now moved to here, which I don't know if that has to do with this new track being involved. Now let's try something weird. I'm gonna just add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We'll add 10 audio tracks. Let's just open up Safari. Let's leave Safari open and open up Chrome. And let's go to YouTube. And while that loads, let's just go ahead and hit record. Okay, something extremely strange happened there. My audio interface just completely cut out. But let's give that one more chance. Maybe we overloaded it, right? Okay, so that's that. Command Z, Command Z. Same thing, doesn't really change it too much. All right, now into this test. Test number 3. We're gonna run it with the MRCC 880 into the Digitact for, I don't know, let's do 5 minutes. And I'm just gonna be browsing around, doing whatever on the computer. Maybe look at our ozone. I'm gonna just load a preset. That'll really push it, right? Oh, you heard that. There it is. Yo, we don't even have to do this for 5 minutes. It lost the plot. Look at that. Look at this huge jump. Look how far off, 1, 2, and then it stayed consistently off. And then look, even here, it jumped off, but then came back on. Look at that. That is insane. I don't know if I'm losing the forest through the trees at this point, right? With plugins loaded and browsing presets in Ozone 9, it all fell apart. This was mainly a change in CPU load though. It went from about 10% at idle to 25% in a single preset change. So these CPU spikes is what I noticed have the biggest effect on my recordings. But this is a really wild stress test, to be honest. And how often is it that someone is changing, mastering presets within a DAW while recording? I don't do it, but maybe you might. Finally, it was time for the Multiclock to shine. I had super high hopes that this is where the Multiclock would beat the MRCC because it's audio versus USB. And I associate USB with CPU usage. Maybe I'm wrong. Audio sync should ignore all that, right? Well, no. Okay, look, this is pretty promising. We're still here relative to the ballpark recording that we had on the original one. It didn't do that random 15 millisecond off thing that we were witnessing with the MRCC. Ultimate test, right? This is it. We'll take it back to the top, hit record. Now, while this is recording, I'm gonna go ahead and just start doing some stuff because we're recording, we're looking at things, we look at ozone, jump up here, let's look at some presets. Oh, I heard it. Ah, there it is. There it is again. Warming this warm soft bass is the one that really jacks it up. Changing presets in ozone caused big CPU spikes, which then caused the sync clock audio to kind of skip and fall behind. And that would then cause the sync to fall off and be perfectly off for the rest of the recording. And because I was losing on all fronts, I had one final like Hail Mary of a test to throw, which I think is a bit more realistic, and that's to see if the ERM or the Multiclock would at least stay stable during recording when the plugins are loaded but not having their parameters moved. So right now you can see that my CPU usage is jumping all over the place. It's jumping between 25% all the way up to 30%. And I'm sure there'll be some jitter because we saw early on that even with nothing loaded, they still both experienced a little bit of jitter. So let's try this out real fast. This is now recording. We'll let this run for like a minute and just kind of jump around. Let's just take a look, right? Nothing to it but to do it. We're gonna zoom in all the way. Show me what you're working with. All right, so we are well under a millisecond. That's here. And I'm mainly just looking down here to see where the millisecond is. So this again is like 20% of a millisecond. So 1/20th. That's kind of where it was earlier, to be honest, when there was no plugins moving around or no plugins even loaded. Let's go ahead and jump around to the beginning of the minute and see what we're looking at here. A millisecond would be here. That's dead on. That's really, really good, to be honest. We're under a millisecond, kind of wherever you jump and look. Okay, now let's run this test with the MRCC, and I honestly don't have high hopes. So the first time we did this, the recording of the MRCC was 15 milliseconds late. Boom, like right off the bat, right? When I just added a new track. Don't know what caused that, but it happened. So now I'm really curious to see, I haven't changed any settings, right? All our sync settings here in the MIDI tab are exactly the same. Hit record. Okay, that's pretty spot on. We're right on the money. Let's run a minute of this. Let's see what happens. Now you can see here, our MIDI actually moves a little bit, 123.0, and then it goes to 0.1 once in a while. Maybe that's the jitter there, right? It's like within a 10th or a 20th of a millisecond, and this is pretty accurate at updating. And I wonder at what point does this MIDI jitter fall on whatever device you're using? How come the device you're receiving, does that play a role in how it processes MIDI? I saw a comment in my last video talking about how whenever they send notes to their gear, it has like 20 milliseconds of latency, but whenever they're sequencing it, it's dead on. So look here, we're a minute in. Let's go ahead and zoom around, see what's good. All right, so here we are a little early. That's fine, well within a milliseconds here. That's about, let's just call it a 20th of a millisecond. Yeah. 20th of a millisecond around the end. We'll jump into the beginning, or into the middle. Same thing, we are well within, that's like, yeah, that's nothing. That's spot on. I'll call that spot on. Let's jump over here to the beginning, bar 6, a little early. That's fine. Okay, a little early, little spot on. None of them are a little late. Ah, here we go. Here's a little late. Okay, and I bet if I tried hard enough and looked into the ERM multi-clock, I can find some that were a little early and a little late. I mean, I guess they all technically are just moving at the end of the day, right? Doesn't matter if they're early or late. They're moving, and they're not supposed to. Let's take a quick look at all the recordings together. So I lined them all up perfectly on bar 2, ignoring the first bar, because that's when everything's kind of taking a second to catch up. So on bar 2, if you really zoom in, they're all right on the money, right? So now let's just jump further into the recordings. Let's just jump right here and see how well everything holds up. So everything's pretty much almost exactly off. You can see this is, again, slightly off from the beat, which is supposed to be here, but so is everything kind of else. I mean, oh, look at here. The multi-clock is a little early. So is the MRCC. Whoa, this one is crazy. What happened here? This is insane. That's a big divergence between all of these. Now I'm really curious. Maybe I should just jump to some ones in the middle, not the ones on the 1. This then gave me the idea to test 16th notes and 8th notes as well, and it was all basically the same results. Look, everything's early here. Now I'm really curious. Let's just look at the no plugin ones and just jump somewhere really, really far ahead. Okay, a little bit of movement between the two, and then all the way at the very end, like, you know, this is 8 minutes and 50 seconds in. That's about correct. Not bad. Okay, multi-clock's a little early. MRCC's dead on. There's jitter all across the block, if you even consider that jitter, because that is so small. Like looking at this, does anybody hear that? Does that mean anything? Does that matter? Both the multi-clock and the MRCC stayed well within the 1 millisecond range. These results were actually very similar to the first test with nothing loaded in live at all. Okay, what did we learn? Well, I learned that the MRCC and the multi-clock are extremely similar in handling MIDI jitter. But now I'm questioning audio accurate MIDI sync, right? Is this just marketing? I also really hope someone explains to us, maybe you, in the comments below, the scenario in which the multi-clock stays stable and the MRCC would fall apart. I feel like I must be missing something. I've tried so many different things. Help me out, please. I really want to learn. I'm also now wondering if a different DAW would have different results. Also, how much of this depends on like the hardware, or how much of it depends on my laptop. Like, trust me, I love the multi-clock. I have a bunch of videos talking about why it's great, but now I'm really wondering if it was just placebo this whole time. Zooming out, the multi-clock does have a ton of features I wish the MRCC had. For example, some big wins that the multi-clock has over the MRCC is that you have control over the latency of each of the jacks on the unit itself. You got these 4 big knobs here. On the MRCC, you always need a DAW to adjust the latency per port. Also, the multi-clock, speaking of knobs, has 4 swing parameters right here on the device. They're cool, they're fun to use, although I used it once in the track and that was about it. And another thing is that the multi-clock can generate its own clock internally, and this is helpful if you want to use it as your main clock to 4 other sequencers. The MRCC 880 does not generate a clock. I kind of really wish it did, but it doesn't. And on the multi-clock, you can also start and stop all your sequencers and then have them start again perfectly on the bar. This is way better than daisy chaining everything together, because once you stop one thing, everything down the line kind of stops. But then again, I really thought about it. I've never played live and wished that I could stop a single sequencer and bring it back on the bar. Once I hit play, I only hit stop when my set is done. So now the big question is, why would the multi-clock be worth it? Well, if you really want to have audio accurate sync, which at this point I don't even know what that offers since my results came in all kinds of mixed up, or if you need any of those other features I mentioned, like the clock generation, latency adjustment per port on hardware, the start and stop functionality that is really cool, but for me, hardly used. And I guess the swing knob is another good one. So where do we go from here? Does this stuff matter? Should I just shut up and go make a tune? It sounds like a good idea to me. Let's do just that. Until next week, my friend, you already know the drill. Share the love, share the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace.